I set about trying to track down as many of these Bomber Command guys as I could in a short space of time. I believe there's somewhere between 500 and 1,000 only still alive. I managed to track down 19 of them, dotted around various parts of the UK. Most of these guys had an official service photograph, which was perhaps for their identity cards or something like that. They weren't actually allowed to have cameras on camp, so a lot of the times, unless you just see the official sort of portrait of themselves and the crew, then, you know, there aren't that many photographs. So I wanted to sort of replicate a little bit the sorts of photographs that they were giving me from their time during the war. Some of them, you know, this was 60 or 70 years ago, and some of them you can just see the same young man, you know, just with a few more wrinkles and a bit less hair. So this is Kelton Younger, who was actually with the Royal Australian Air Force. He was originally from Victoria near Melbourne. Kelton was shot down over France, and as with all of these planes that were in Bomber Command, they were incredibly difficult to get out of. They were flying at a very low altitude, and by the time he actually managed to get out of the escape hatch, he didn't have time to pull his parachute, and he actually landed face down in a field in France without his chute opening, but was incredibly fortunate and didn't sustain any injuries. This is Dave Fellows. He was one of the rear gunners. The job title was actually air gunner, but the rear gunner was the most dangerous seat on the plane, because you were just sat in a glass dome at the back, and quite often at the beginning especially, the German fighter pilots would come in and attack the bomber planes from behind. So it was quite often the rear gunner who bore the brunt. It was just a horrific day-to-day occurrence for them to have friends who didn't return from missions. The sort of overriding theme was that they realised it was a bit of a lottery, and you never really knew when it was your turn. They're all happy to talk about what it was like to be in Bomber Command and how the sort of day-to-day running of being in a bomber plane worked. As far as their sort of personal experiences, it takes a little bit of getting into with these guys, because I think for a lot of them the memories are just tinged with sadness. This is Ken Wallace, who was a pilot. He flew on Lysanders and Wellingtons. He was the oldest guy who I spoke to. He's aged 96. His father was one of the pioneering aviators in the UK. And Ken would say that he was born to fly. And he still actually does fly at the age of 96. He flies autogyros. This is Stephen Stevens, who's from Norwich. He was also a pilot. And this is a mark of the standards that these guys held for themselves. He actually flew 30 sorties, but on his 30th sortie he was shot down and he didn't complete the bombing mission. So if you ask him how many sorties he flew, he actually says 29, because he doesn't count the 30th because it wasn't a successful mission. I think we have to think about what it was like for that generation of people. For you and I, we look up in the sky and we see aircraft flying all the time, and it's no big deal really. But for them, flying was this pretty new magical thing that wasn't, you know, not many people had the opportunity to fly in their lives. And so for many of them, they thought, well, if I'm going to get involved in this war effort, I want to do something that's going to be, I'm going to use the word cool. And they all thought that flying was really cool. Whereas the reality, obviously, for many of them was it was going up in, and your chances of survival were very slim. But it didn't matter whether they were pilots or whether they were gunners or bomb aimers. They just wanted to be in the air, because for them, flying was this magical, mysterious form of transport that not many people got the chance to experience.